Hey, all you rad dads out there.
That's great. I like
Oh, and I like your shirt, dude. I like
Oh
the
yeah,
hat.
thanks. Yeah, I
Yeah.
picked that up. What is it? Who does all the merch for Lagwagon and did the Bad Astronaut stuff? Tempo.
Yeah, yeah.
Put it out last year. So I was like, oh man, I didn't have it before. Now's the time. So
I know. I was so stoked when I saw that happen. I was like, oh, yeah,
yeah.
we're doing another run of Bad Astronaut. I think it was maybe tied to Joey because he was doing a lot of these. Well, he's still doing them, but Joey's been doing a lot of these live stream
Yep.
things. Um, and uh, and I think he did like an all Bad Astronaut one, you know. And
I missed it.
yeah, yeah.
I didn't
I
see
jumped
it.
on for like I jumped on and caught part of it, but you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
Um, but no, that's a special band, man. That's something that like honestly, it's like, well, I mean, let's connect it to what we're talking about. It's
Yeah.
like you might have just because you have a family and because you have maybe a wife and kids doesn't mean you have everything you need. You still need like I don't know your parents if they're still around. You still need your homies like your friends
Yep.
from way back when.
Yep.
And especially once you start like launching into life, whatever it is you've been trying to make work, and then it starts to work. Um, your friends from like back home or like your real friends that have known you from forever become they take on such a different role. It's like
Yep.
grounding. It's something that like keeps you down to earth, tells you, hey, you get to do this, you don't have to
Yep.
do this,
Yep.
tells you those things, those simple things that you don't even realize you need to hear, that just make it different. And I think that the same thing happens for um, musicians. It sounds so pretentious to say artists, but like when you have a band that starts to like work, it really does, there is a lot of work involved in it.
Right.
And because like you've got to like, book shows and do all the put together all the pieces, oh, we got to do this, we got to route this, we got to coordinate this, we got to do this. We've got to make T-shirts. We got to find a place
Yep.
to order the T-shirts. Now we got to get the designs to them, and we got to do all the things. We got to have them shipped somewhere. It starts to feel a little bit like work.
Mhm.
Whereas if you think about music, what do you do with music? You play music, right?
Yeah.
So music comes from like a playful place. It's something you do for. I mean, most of us did this shit for fun forever and still enjoy doing it, and probably and do it whether we're getting paid or not. It's not like, oh god, I gotta fucking work. I'll see you later. I gotta go play a fucking rock show.
Yeah.
Like, dude, this is fucking amazing. Like, I would pay to do this if
Yeah, a lot of people do.
I guess so. Fuck yeah.
Bands starting out. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure you remember those days.
Yeah, although we always, generally, me and my friends avoided that, mostly because we couldn't afford to do that shit, but also because we just kind of thought like, well, what kind of, it doesn't sound like a very fun party to go to if you have to like force it that hard. I'd rather like, we mostly came up playing shows, because we were all like kids when we started out, so we weren't even old enough to get into the bars in our hometown. We grew up in Santa Barbara, and so we would just like, it was very seat of the pants. It was like you start a band with your friends, you make up some songs, and then the natural progression was kind of like, well, now what? Well, I guess we should either try to find a way to record or play these shows, play some shows for people. And so what you did was you just were like, well, we could bust our ass and maybe pay money to try to play some bar, but none of our friends are gonna be able to get in. Plus, like, we feel like it just doesn't feel like where we're supposed to be. It feels like we'd be like this like annoyance that people would have to deal with, for half an hour until they could like have like dance night or whatever they were there
Right.
for. And like, whereas there was this amazing like weird sort of kid run scene in our hometown where people could just like play driveways. I guess like the California,
That's
we grew
cool,
up in
yeah.
Southern California, so it's like the California equivalent of like an East Coast basement show.
Yeah.
Where it's probably too cold on the East Coast or humid and muggy in the summer to play outside, so you play in your basement. Well, in California, we would play. The move was to play driveway shows. So there's this place called Isla Vista, which was like, it's like this little like college sort of enclave within Santa Barbara. It's like a square mile adjacent to the university there. And basically, here was the deal: like, you figure this out really quickly when you're 15. you're like, okay, so here's the deal. You skateboard down the street until you find some student like outside of their apartment, like washing their car or doing whatever the fuck they're doing, and then you ask them like, hey, dude, if we give you money to buy a keg, can our band play at your house this weekend? Like a total stranger,
Yeah.
like, can you literally like pull your cars out of the driveway and let us like use that as like a makeshift stage?
Yeah.
And then your driveway, like the lead up to, the carport would be the stage and the driveway would be the audience. And they'd usually just be like, yeah, I don't know, dude. Let me ask my roommate. And then they'd be like, hey, John, is it cool if we have like some show? Like they're going to pay for the beer. And that's like all you had to say was someone else is going to pay for the beer.
Yeah, sold.
Oh, yeah. Yes, just do it. And then like somehow that was a binding agreement. And we had to like, we're like, okay, shit. So what's the address? And we'd like write it down and then cruise over to the copy shop and make some cut and paste flyer and then go to school and just hand it out to anyone who looked weird, like skaters and metal kids and punk kids and goths and just weird as anyone who was a weirdo. Basically, it was like, hey, and the answer was like, it wasn't like, yeah, I want to come see your band play. It was basically like, yeah, I want to do anything but stay home.
Yeah,
because I'm a kid and I'd
part
rather
of something. Yeah.
to do. So that was as simple as that. It was just simple, like, and then you would have maybe you'd ask another band to play with you.
Yeah.
So it was very organic. We just kind of figured it out, and then we would have a show, and then people would come and they'd be like, hey, are you going to like the venue was basically the address. So it would be like, are you going to that show at 6644, whatever the street was called? And the word would spread, and then people would come to the show, and usually it would get out of hand, and sometimes the cops would show up.
Yeah.
But it didn't really matter because it wasn't really about the music or about the band. It was just about like young people getting together and being kind of wild in the streets, It was like, oh, the band's over? Okay, whatever. So now what do you want to do? Let's go make out, or let's go like steal some beer from these college students. And that was it. And we just did that over and over again until there was like this weird community sort of formed around it, where there was like the older kids bands were kind of the headliners, not because they were sold more records or had songs on the radio, but just because they like could grow facial hair because they were like, because they had like a car, and so it's just sort of was this natural sort of hierarchy where you had these bands, and then we had like like me and my friends were in the younger band, so we were the opening band.
Yeah.
And then like a band from out of town would come in town because maybe they had like a connection to our town, like NoFX. I'm really dating myself here, but back in the late 80s,
great. I love it.
The drummer Eric from NoFX, who used to be the craziest guy in NoFX, by the way. He's like the mellow sort of
totally
guy now. He was the fucking he was like the Sid Vicious of NoFX back then. Like Fat Mike was like the mild-mannered, calm guy.
Yeah.
And Eric, the drummer, was like the fucking dreadlocks, tattoos, just fucking heroin, he was just crazy back then. Anyway, I think he might have been dating some girl in Santa Barbara because for some reason you could not get rid of NoFX. Like they were just like, they weren't from our hometown, but they also had a huge crush on a band from our hometown, which is like in our, when we were growing up, this band was like the fucking Rolling Stones to us. They were like the be all end all. Was the local band called RKL, Rich Kids on
yeah, of course, yeah.
A lot of people heard of them because eventually they were on Epitaph, and they were kind of this notorious band that like went through the forest with a machete and cleared the path for everybody else. Right. And they were actually phenomenal musicians. Joey grew up with them because Joey's quite a bit older than all of us. And so he and RKL were all like kids in the same neighborhood. Actually, the funny thing is Lagwagon basically is RKL now. Like Chris Rest, the guitarist of Lagwagon, was in RKL.
Dave Ron.
And Dave Ron was like the eventual drummer of RKL. Yeah. And then Little Joe, the bass player, was also in RKL for a long period of time. So it's kind of funny. And then actually the tall guy in Lagwagon, Chris Flippin, there was two bands in our town that were like the Beatles and the Stones to us as like dumb little punk kids. RKL, which were like probably the biggest because they had put something out, on a label called Mystic Records. They actually had a record you could see in a store. So like that might as well be, they might as well have been fucking, they would just, it was untouched. It was like, Michael Jackson, Madonna, RKL, like it was like they were just superstars to us. And then like the other band in town was called Threatened Hope, and they never actually did anything. They never like I don't think they ever put a record out or anything like that. But they were like, at least at the time, at the snapshot when me and my friends were getting into the scene, when we were like 13, 14, the two kind of bands in town that were young grown-ups. They were probably 19, 20 years old. I don't know how old they were then, but maybe they were 21. Was RKL and Threatened Hope. So the guitarist of Threatened Hope, Chris Flippin.
Yeah.
The guitarist of RKL, Chris Rest. Both of those guys, guitar players of Lagwagon. So when you see Lagwagon today, a lot of people just go, yeah, Lagwagon, Rad Fat Records. It's so much more than that. Yeah. They're a representation of like the entire just forming of our scene
coming
in
together.
Santa Barbara. They are really the manifestation of that, and it's pretty cool that I think most people probably just go see Lagwagon because they have good songs and they're on Fat Records and all that shit. Yeah. They represent lots of things to lots of different people around the world because they've been around for like 100 fucking years now. But to our hometown, to me and my friends, Lagwagon represents the sort of like, the sort of victory of all of those street parties and hours of just like cut and paste flyers and walking around town trying to get people to care. And so it really is kind of a wonderful thing. So that said, Lagwagon went on, became professional. The Sugarcult was a band I started with some friends in the late 90s, and then that started to become pretty, like professional feeling. And at that time, me and Joey, who are old friends, and actually Derrick, who's no longer with us anymore, right. Derrick Plourde, who was the drummer of Lagwagon, and I had also played with in my first band ever, which was a band called Illiterate. That like we were like the
crazy.
If Threat and Hope were playing here, there was like another band, and then Illiterate was like the first band that went on. We were like 14-year-old kids in a neighborhood, and we formed that band. We just a typical shitty 80s punk band that tried to sound like DRI.
Yeah.
And none of us could play or anything, but it was like literally I moved to a new neighborhood, and the drummer who lived down the street was this kid named Dave, who's talked about in a Lagwagon song called Stoking the Neighbors, by the way, for those watching.
Oh yeah, there's some trivia, yeah.
People who aren't completely fucking asleep by now. By the way, also connecting Dave, there's a song on an early Lagwagon record called Bury the Hatchet, which is about how Dave and Joey had this weird rivalry because Joey used to date this girl named Kelly who was our age, and then when Joey broke up with Kelly, Dave started going out with Kelly, and so Joey was kind of like a little bit vindictive and was like, "Oh no, you don't, motherfucker!" And so that has a lot to do with the origin of Lagwagon. It's like it is a tale of two cities because Santa Barbara has like the fancy part of town, which is Montecito, where RKL's from and where Joey's from, and the sort of like poor part of town, which is Isla Vista, where it's made for college students to live, but a lot of like families live there too. That's the guys in Threatened Hope. So they were sort of the like, and then you had us, and we were the kids that lived sort of in between in the suburbs called Goleta, which was like right between Santa Barbara and Ivy, and Montecito was like, you'd get a nosebleed if you went to Montecito. It was kind of far away. All of this shit is in like within 15 minutes. But when you're a kid, you're like, you don't have a car. So it's like, fuck, I can't even be friends with you because you live like a 45-minute bus ride away from me. Like, or like, I can't even skate to your house. Like it's off the table, Anyway, I'm jumping around so much, but hopefully all of this shit will make a little bit of sense. And it's like, the point is, it's a small town and there was a handful of us, just a few kids and a few people like, anyway, so we all had these bands, and I had that band I said Illiterate because I moved there, and I moved to that neighborhood right like a block away from Dave. Dave had a drum kit, so I just started playing guitar, and I was like, dude, let's jam, and we tried to play covers, and we were so inferior at our instruments that the covers just sounded like trash, so we had this kind of epiphany where we were like, dude, you know what we should do? Is we should make up our own songs. Because that way, instead of revealing how shitty we are by playing these covers so badly, we can at least own how we play our own songs and just be like, yeah, they're supposed to sound like that.
Yeah, there's no comparison, right? So
right. And we all started out probably to be honest, our roots go to Iron Maiden and Motley Crue and all that. Like we were into metal when we were little kids, and then we kind of fell into punk rock because we got into skateboarding, and punk rock was kind of just at that point in the 80s, like punk was just like the soundtrack to skating. And once we started listening to it, it's like you could go see like a huge show, like you could go see Ozzy Osbourne at the Forum, and you're gonna see him like this big on stage. Or you could like literally go to that area and watch a band play in a driveway and see like 8 bands play.
Yeah, crazy.
At some little place. And like not only are you like in the pit, like at the show, like standing right next to, like holding the microphone so it doesn't chip the singer's tooth, but you're like literally like 5 minutes later, you're like helping them load their gear out, and you're like, and they're like being nice to you.
Right.
And they're like, yo, dude, so I'm from I'm from the Bay Area. What's up with your scene? And you're like, wow, this guy's like in a band, and he's like, I don't have to like wait in line to get his autograph at like some meet and greet. Yeah. This guy's just like another dude who's like just a shitty fucking kid, who's like wearing, beat up Vans and has like bad skin. And it's felt so like immediate. It didn't feel like the real thing. It didn't feel like, oh, this could never be on MTV. You never back then thought punk rock would ever amount to anything other than just a like sort of like regional sort of fun thing to do. I mean, you heard about the Ramones, you heard about the Clash, but you didn't really think of that as the same way. Like those bands to us were like, it's like the Kinks and the Who and the Beatles. It seemed like from another time, a long time ago. It seems really cool, but it just was hard to like even like wrap your head around because they were like legends already by then. And so when you see these local shows, it seemed like something just like so like insignificant, because it was just like, whatever, this is just like our shitty little scene and our little shitty little amp and our shitty little songs. It didn't seem like anything was ever going to amount to anything. So therefore we didn't really take it that seriously. And I think that might be one of the secret ingredients in life.
I think you're right. Yeah. I
think people maybe take themselves a little too seriously, or they, for lack of a better term, they try too hard.
Well, yeah. So I think a lot about this, like, and you're probably the same way as me. You listen to music, you think kind of critically about it, and you think about like, why do I like this album from this band better than this album? And a lot of times it's like, why do I really love their early stuff versus their later stuff or whatever? Mm-hmm. And to me, and I play a little bit, but I'm not a professional musician, so maybe I don't have that insight. But I think it's that authenticity that's like, secret ingredient that you can't sort of quantify or something. And I think that's a big part of that sort of punk ethos and that whole scene, right? Is that authenticity, inclusivity, and you just kind of felt it in that music, right?
Well, yeah, I think so. And I think that honestly, when genres, in my opinion, when genres become boring is when they become too codified and sort of self-aware to the point where it's like, forming punk band, looking for people who like punk music, must be this tall and wear these kinds of shorts and have this kind of haircut and have this kind of an opinion. And then you get something that is, unfortunately, you lose a generation or two of authenticity because it becomes so sort of, I don't want to say pretentious, but it seems like it's like, I think there's something to be said for allowing the freedom for like the sort of happy accidents that happen. Then what happens, the following generation comes along, sees that happy accident, assumes it must have been planned and organized, and then they copy it, and then so I think that's a problem a lot of that happens in music a lot, including punk. Punk doesn't get a free pass with that. To me, punk is possibly one of the worst culprits of that fucking thing, of the like, hey, I heard a quote once. It was actually a quote from, of all people, because I know everyone thinks he's kind of crazy because he talks about UFOs all the time, but Tom from Blink-182, he once said in an interview that I randomly read, it said, use your influences, don't be your influences. Like, it was probably like, what's your advice for young artists? And I was like, damn, of all the people to fucking say that, leave it to him. Because I remember when Blink first came out, everyone was like, oh my God, there's like the guy that sounds like Fat Mike, and then there's the other guy, and they were very maybe derivative, but then I think they kind of fearlessly sort of steered it into their own thing and found their own way, because they figured, well, there's already, NoFX already exists. No Use for Name already exists. Lagwagon already exists. What can we do that's different? And they found something that they could sort of own. Green Day already exists. There's already a poppy kind of punk band. The Descendants have already existed. Fuck, what are we supposed to do? Just break up? No. And then they found their own little thing, and they kind of embraced their weirdness. But then what happened, they created a monster, because then like every fucking kid in every suburb of every corner of America started a band that exactly was like, okay, we got to wear those shirts, we got to have this kind of humor between songs, we got to jump like this, we got to play Mesa Boogies, we got to do this. Yeah. And it was just like, fuck. I mean, for a lot of those bands, it worked out. There was a lot of like bands like Newfound Glory and stuff that became huge, that were, you know, derived from them.
Right.
But like, I think that use your influences, don't be your influences. What I take away from that is look at your influences and go and get curious about their roots. Go, okay, how did they start? Oh, okay, it was weird. This guy had, you know, this guy had these influences. This guy was into this. They sort of compromised and found a common ground, and they wound up with this sound. That's kind of cool. You learn from your influences. They let your influences like empower you to and inspire you to do something rad, rather than looking at your influences as this like set of limitations that you I'm losing my voice for some reason. This like set of like rigid limitations, like, well, I'd really like to do this, but I can't. Why? Well, because punk bands don't do that, and we want to be a punk. We identify ourselves as a punk band. It's like, no, that's how you get really like just derivative, kind of boring, same old stuff. And why? You know, like,
well, people feel that, right? Like as a listener, you feel that authenticity is not there.
Yeah, I don't know if you feel it consciously, especially when you're young, but I think that in time you're gonna look back and you're gonna, you know, I mean, the same way when I was fucking young, it was like anything that colored outside the guidelines, to borrow the Jawbreaker phrase from Boxcar. It's like anything that colored outside the guidelines of my little worldview that I constructed in my fucking 13 years of existence was like such a threat to me, because I just wanted to believe that, that, okay, you could count on this being like this, and this being like this, and this is this, and this means this, and that people who like this kind of music aren't allowed to like this kind of music. But secretly, I was like, when my sister's fucking playing Madonna in the other room, I'm stoked. Those are great songs. Yeah. I'm not going to tell my friends that, you know. when like Tom Petty comes on MTV, I'm not like, fuck you. I'm like, dude, this is fucking great, you know. I'm not going to go wear a Tom Petty shirt at the fucking show this weekend, but like, you realize like, intuitively you're like, I bet a lot of other people feel this way too.
Yeah.
And then you start meeting people, and you like, when I met Joey, he was a couple years older. So like I said, it's like you know, when you meet some older kid that's kind of like the cool kid, you're like, oh man. And then he's like, dude, I fucking never listen to punk. I listen to fucking James Taylor and fucking Tom Waits. And you're like, whoa, really? That's cool. You know what I mean? And you're like, oh, it kind of gives you permission. Yeah. To like, and you're like, that seems, I kind of like the way that sounds. I like the way somebody who's playing like heavy abrasive music to learn that. And then you know, another great example when I was growing up was Metallica. You would see Metallica, and they were considered a heavy metal band, but then you'd see them, and like their bass player would be wearing like a Misfits shirt, and their singer would be wearing a GBH shirt. And that was like a lifeline for us. Like, honestly, because we thought, well, we're allowed to like metal, but since we don't have mohawks like those kids, we're not allowed to like punk rock. I remember like in 8th grade just going over to the kid in my classroom who had like a Black Flag shirt on, and I was like, dude, can you make me a mixtape? You know, and he's like, really? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, I was like, what's good? And he's like, dude, you got to check out fucking Suicidal Tendencies. You got to check out the Misfits. You got to check out this, that. And I started listening to it, and I was like, this is pretty rad. And then go back to me and my friend playing in our neighborhood band, failing at trying to learn these fancy songs. Yeah. And then before you know it, we hear like DRI dealing with it, and that first Suicidal record, and we're like, dude, we can actually make up songs that sound like this, and they actually sound similar to it, because those bands are really raw and unrefined, and you know, and I mean, those are great songwriters too. You know, the songwriting is another thing. That's just a je ne sais quoi. But like, I mean, you listen to DRI, it's like, yeah, that's fast music that any kid who's been playing guitar for 2 days can play, but I dare you to write a fucking song like that. You know what I mean? Even those are really good songs. But really, that's what we did. We started making up those songs, and it was just like, it wasn't like, yay, we can do this now professionally. It was just like fun. It was like, hey, this is way more fun and way less frustrating. and it's something we did. So then our other friend would come over, and like I'd be like, dude, watch my finger when I'm playing like two note bar chord, or not even bar chords. They were like power chords, whatever you want to call it. I was like, just watch this finger and follow along on this other instrument. Got a bass in his hands, and he just like instantly picked it up because he's just that guy who picks shit up quickly. And that was Derrick Plourde.
Oh, crazy.
Yeah. Just a kid in our neighborhood, you know? And then because he's that kid who picks shit up quickly, he'd be like, hey, show me how to do that thing on your guitar.
Right.
And then he like, we'd go outside to do like curb tricks, take a break from practice, and we'd hear Derrick get on the drum kit and just be like, and a week later it was like, and then like a month later it was like, and he was off to the races, and we're like, okay, this guy's a fucking like genius. Yeah. Like he literally, everything he touches, he gets really good at. Unfortunately, the same thing, you know, when he touched drugs, he got really good at that too. But like, I mean, he was like literally that kid. He was so bright and so capable that you could just show him like you know, you just show him like, all right, here's the first basics of something. And like, I mean, if you would have taught him how to fucking fry an egg, a month later, he would have been like a fucking Michelin star chef. Oh, he's just that guy. He's just that fucking guy. He's so smart and so fucking like had such incredible drive and self-discipline. And so he got so good at drums that this is like, there was that weird summer where we were like, well, how do we gently tell Dave that we kind of want Derrick to play drums instead of him? And it's just, we kind of just did this idea where we're like, well, why don't we just all switch instruments? Wouldn't that be fun? And so our friend Banks, who was our singer at the time, he lived across town, so it was really cumbersome, and he didn't have a car yet. You know, we weren't old enough to drive, so it was really cumbersome to like have his mom drive him to practice or take a bus or all this shit. So eventually we were like, well, Banks started like joined some other band across town, and so the three of us were like, why don't we just switch instruments? Derrick will play drums. I'll switch from guitar to bass, and Dave will switch from drums to vocals. Like, you don't have to be behind the drum set. You can be a lead singer now. You know, and he was kind of like, when you're a kid, no one wants to sing. That's like playing goalie. For sure. You know? Yeah. No one wants to be the singer because it's kind of embarrassing. You're like, I don't want to fucking sing. Like, you know, but we did that, and then we had this opportunity to get these two other guitar players. I don't know how we met them. I don't even remember how we met them. I think Derrick maybe... Oh, Derrick was really good friends with the guys in Threatened Hope. And they were sort of... I don't know if they were breaking up or if they were sort of breaking down or whatever it was, but like Derrick became really good friends with the tall guy, with Chris Flippin in Lagwagon. And so he got Chris to play guitar. And then this guy, if you remember our singer Banks from Illiterate, he eventually moved, you know, to a band from his high school downtown, and they were called VFH, Vatos from Hell. And their guitar player was this guy named Darren Yardley. And somehow we got, I don't know if Banks told him about us, but somehow we got Darren. And the only reason we could get Darren and Chris was because they were old enough to have cars. Yeah. So like, because they didn't live near us, they didn't live in our neighborhood. The three of us lived like, we could like, you know, skateboard to each other's house and like have sleepovers and, you know, jump in Dave's pool. I mean, we literally were children in the same neighborhood. So it was all just happenstance. None of this shit was like, put an ad in a paper, try to form a band. It was just like, dude, I know these two guys that can play guitar. And we just thought like, okay, we'll be the kids that sort of suck. And we'll get these two like guys that are a couple years older than us playing guitar. And they'll like show us how to be a real band. So we can kind of move up on a rung on this ladder here. And we started this band, and with Dave singing, with me on bass, with Derrick on drums, and Chris Flippin on guitar, and Darren on guitar. And that band we called Section 8. Yeah. Okay. So I'm jumping around a lot here, but somebody out there is going to be like, no way, all this shit's connected.
No, this is great. And yeah, and I, as we started talking a little bit earlier, I hit record. I didn't even introduce you yet or anything like that.
Oh, it doesn't matter. I'm just some guy named Marco who fucking talks too much. But anyway, put all that shit in the fucking intro.
Well, yeah, we'll get to that later. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so hopefully we can we'll get to that. But I think this is an important thing, because otherwise people are like, I don't get it. Why? What does he have to do with fucking Joey Cape or Bad Astronaut, or why, you know, or I thought Sugarcult was just some fucking band that played at Hot Topic with Good Charlotte. I want you to know that there's fucking roots. And that's the to me, the fun part of anyone's career is the roots. The other stuff is like, you know, once you get the hardest part of a flight is the takeoffs and the landings, right?
Yeah.
And once it's in flight, it just fucking, you know, the hoodies fucking print themselves, the shows book themselves, the fucking sound check themselves. That's not the interesting part of a musician's journey. It's the fucking early part, and then what happens later, you know. I'll let you know that when I get there. I'm still working on that right now. But what happened before the takeoff was all this, just these kids in this town, Santa Barbara, doing the shit, because we had this one band maybe that provided us some kind of like proof of concept, and that was RKL. There was one other band too, to be fair, called Toad the Wet Sprocket.
Oh yeah, I know Toad the Wet Sprocket.
They were like, they made it, and they're like more of like a mainstream sort of adult contemporary sound, like. But I will say, and not a lot of people will really, I actually have a flyer, I wish I could dig it up, with No Effects and Toad the Wet Sprocket on
Crazy.
it. They were a punk band, believe it or not.
Really?
Just because when we were kids, there wasn't this like, punk didn't really mean a sound. Punk just meant you were too young to play in bars and you played music that was derived from underground shit, right? And whereas like our bands were listening to like Suicidal and like I said, DRI and stuff like that. Like No Effects was really into RKL, so that's, you know. But one of the things that I don't remember who RKL were into. I never really asked them. I mean, they were definitely derived from like Angry Samoans and stuff like that, like really in Minor Threat. But like Toad the Wet Sprocket were all about the Smiths. And early like REM. And if you know, we think of REM now as like some mainstream band, but back in the 80s, REM was like, you know, it was a very underground thing. Like they called it college rock. There was like the Replacements and REM and all these bands that would just, there were the bands that ended up inspiring like maybe Nirvana. Yeah. But like, if you do the cultural anthropology, which I'm obsessed with, I'm such a fucking music nerd, but like, you know, Toad the Wet Sprocket would be playing shows and you'd be like, oh yeah, what's up with these guys? They sound all jangly. You'd be like, oh, they're into the Smiths and REM. And you'd be like, all right, cool. Like that's the band you're going to like catch your breath while they're playing, because the other bands are going to be like furious fucking circle pits. Yeah. But their singer was like 15. He was like a couple years older than us. I mean, you know, he was a pretty young kid and he was at every punk show, you know. It's just that he was like the sort of more like pensive kind of poet. Like if it would have been 10 years later, Toad the Wet Sprocket would have been they would have been considered an emo band, like a 90s. They would have been like Mineral or fucking, you know, Jets to Brazil or something like that. It's just a matter of like time and marketing and production. But if you could take some of those early Toad songs and put them in the studio with fucking the guy from Jawbox producing, and it would have ended up sounding like Jets to Brazil. You know, it's weird. It's weird to think, because you think of people listening to this, if there's anyone listening to this, they're probably like, Toad the Wet Sprocket, fucking Walk on the Ocean. What are you talking about? Yeah. 1 degree of separation from
that's crazy.
Blake Schwarzenbach and the Weakerthans, you know, and Sunny Day Real Estate or whatever. So anyway, so they were the band that did some shit. RKL was the band that did some shit, and then there was a lot of other bands like that were sort of like just regionally kind of made us feel like, oh shit, there's like shit that can happen to a band. There's a band, Rat Pack, that was like friends with RKL, and they did a lot of stuff. And then of course No Effects, who you know, we sort of adopted as a Santa Barbara band, even though they were technically from LA. Like watching them start to get like kind of things happening. Just it was a really interesting time, but we were so young that we couldn't really like comprehend it. We just kind of took it for granted. It's like every weekend was like a new fucking era. Like, oh, that was last weekend. This weekend, this is the new band. This is the new, you know, girl everyone's got a crush on, and this is the new place to play. It was really weird, but anyway, we started that band, Section 8, that grew out of our original band, Illiterate, and then Section 8, because I remember there was another band in town that was kind of like, I guess you would call it crossover, where there was this like weird like cross-pollination of speed metal and hardcore punk. And so they called it Crossover, probably because DRI's record was called Crossover. Why am I talking about DRI so much? And like bands that sort of like, they didn't have long hair, like Anthrax and Slayer or Metallica, but they still played pretty metal songs, but they looked more like punk bands. I don't know. There was a period where punk and speed metal really kind of like, you know, had a nice roll in the hay.
Coalesced, yeah.
Like late 80s we're talking about. There was that moment where like, I mean, punk bands grew their hair out and sort of became metal bands, and a lot of metal bands cut their hair shorter and became punk. There was a weird like happy medium that in my opinion was the uncredited writing on the wall that begat grunge.
Yeah.
Right? If you go back and do the math, you're like, wait, how did bands like Soundgarden and Nirvana and all those bands pop up? They're like, you know, like Eddie Vedder from Pearl Jam's like a fucking huge punk rocker. And it's like, what gave them the courage to do that? Well, probably once they started seeing like this sort of like Bloods and Crips truce between speed metal and punk rock. And they realized, well, both people come to our shows, both like to run around in circles and do stage dives. We both have the fucking same amps.
Yeah.
Your tone is a little bit more this. My tone's a little more. There was some kind of, I remember seeing it because I was a kid right there watching it happen. And like, you know, there was a band called Chemical that was basically our town's version of that. And that was Joey Cape's band. It's called Chemical. And he played guitar and sang, and there was a drummer and a bass player, and they sounded, you know, they were very much like sort of speed metal, hardcore punk. And then we were Section 8, and we would play shows together. And then Joey, because Joey was like the guy who had a 4-track, so he was, you know, a recording engineer and a producer. He came over to our rehearsal space and recorded us on a 4-track. Unfortunately, I don't even have that tape anymore. Fuck, you know. But that was basically the Section 8 demo. But because we started hanging out with Joey and them, again, like I said, Joey broke up with his girlfriend. Dave started dating her. And then there was like that. Then eventually I moved away to go to LA because I was actually playing in another band, and they had moved to LA a year before. Back then you were always in like 3 or 4 bands.
Right.
And I was playing in another band that I kind of liked better. And I moved to LA to go to college, and I just kind of wanted to get out of Santa Barbara. So the band just sort of faded away. I moved away. And then like a month later, Dave got kind of like, I don't know if he got kicked out or just sort of pushed out, but basically Joey moved in and said, guess what? I'm your new singer. Yeah. And so Joey sort of like, I mean, I don't say this in a negative way, but he sort of like hijacked. He's somewhere between, he sort of hijacked the band, but he also sort of salvaged the band because this band was like scrappy. And then Joey came in, and like I said, he was a little bit more experienced, a couple years older. And he was like, dude, here's him, and a much more sophisticated songwriter. Because we were just like driving by Braille, figuring out as we went along. And he came in and he had like song structure and like took some of our old shitty songs and like gave them a little bit, you know, spruced them up a bit, took a bunch of his ideas. And so he basically took over that band. He basically took over Section 8. And then once they got signed to Fat Records, they did a name search and found out there was already a band called Section 8. So they changed it like last minute, right before Duh was pressed up. They changed it to Lagwagon. Yeah. And that's Lagwagon. So crazy. I get to sort of have a little bit of claim in the roots of Lagwagon, even though I was never actually in it at the same time as Joey. The only person in Lagwagon who's an original member, if you count that pre-Joey era, technically the only constant who's been there from day one is Chris Flippin, is the big bitch. Yeah, the tall guy.
That's so crazy. What an amazing story.
It's crazy. It's fucking weird, you know?
And you've obviously...
like, fuck, life goes by fast. Like, shit feels like it was like another lifetime ago, and simultaneously it feels like it was like 3 years ago. And it's so weird how fast shit just zooms by and just happens, you know?
Well, and it's so funny to hear it, like, as a fan in kind of retrospect. Like, you know, when I used to look at old Lagwagon records or whatever and do what every kid does who's into punk rock, like try and find, you know, the connections between the different bands. You're looking through the thank yous and who produced it and who are the roadies and, you know, whatever. You know, when I see names come up and kind of try and draw that connection, but like you've just really explained it for me here, but you've also stayed in touch with Joey and all those guys over the years still and continue to work with them and stuff. So,
and we all stayed friends. I mean, all through the years we've all been friends. We were just drinking together one night. We're like, dude, don't you miss when playing in a band was just about like getting a 12-pack and sitting in a room with your friends and fucking jamming without any thought of like what our identity is, what we sound like, what we're going for, when our records do, when our tours, you know, when it's just like, don't you just miss just doing it just cuz, like
Yeah.
just because, you know. And so that was Bad Astronaut. We were like, yeah, we should do it, man. Fuck it. Let's. My friend has a place we can rehearse. Let's go and let's play some. You know, we started off with Joey had some songs that he didn't think were right for Lagwagon, and I had some ideas, and Derrick had some ideas, and we just started fucking around. And because we had this kind of like attitude where we kind of wanted to protect Bad Astronaut from becoming as organized and professional as our other bands. So we were like, let's not make t-shirts. Now, of course, you're wearing a Bad Astronaut t-shirt. So, yeah. And then let's not play shows. Let's not even fucking play shows because we're too busy with our other shit to add more, into the equation. Let's just do this as a fun thing, and then let's record like whenever we get a chance to come up for air with our other projects. And that's exactly what we did. We just started like recording, and we were recording in a studio that was called Orange Whip. It was owned by a guy named Angus Cook, who also plays electric cello.
Right. And
so the attitude was like, dude, do you want to play cello on our fucking record? And then before you knew it, we're like, well, you're in the band. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Anyone who walks into this fucking door and wants to play on this record gets to be in the band now. And then another guy who was at the studio was this guy, Tom Flowers, this incredible fucking guitar player from Santa Barbara and songwriter and engineer and producer. And we were just like, dude, Tom should lay down some little guitar things. And next thing you know, it's like, okay, Tom's in the band too. Yeah. And then another guy was like, we brought in to play some keyboards who Joey had grown up with, this guy named Todd Capps. Yeah. And again, it's all just like, there was never a time where we put an ad in the paper saying, looking for musicians that are into this kind of, it was just like, there's people in Bad Astronaut that are like 10 years, I think I'm like 10 years younger than Angus, and I don't think Angus probably ever went to a punk show in his life. I don't even think he knows. And then if so it wasn't like, it was just a bunch of people that had the only thing we had in common was that we liked each other, and that we liked to have a couple beers, and that the 12 notes in a fucking, A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, and the fucking, sharps in between. That was pretty much the only thing we had in common. And it was just like, that's how you end up with something. Well, I don't know.
It's amazing.
In my never to be humble opinion, Bad Astronaut sounds kind of fucking unique. And that's because it's a bunch of different people coming from different places, hearing music differently, with different record collections, kind of creating this like amalgamation of weirdness that sort of fucking works.
Yeah, Acrophobe is for sure in my top records of all time. Like, it's just amazing. I remember when it came out, hearing it and just being like, what the fuck is this? Like, this is amazing. And you could just feel that. It's this conversation we've talked about a couple times here, like about that authenticity. Just like you could feel that it came from somewhere completely authentic. And yeah, it sucks to not have a band touring that you can go see necessarily. And I know you guys did play some shows here and there.
Yeah, we did a weird run of shows in Australia. We waited until 10 years went by before we ever played our first show. We had 10 years from when Acrophobe came out. We played our first, after Derrick died, unfortunately. We sort of like, we were in the middle of making another record when Derrick died. For people who don't know, Derrick died in March of 2005, and we were in the midst of making our record, the third record.
12 Small Steps.
12 Small Steps in One Giant Disappointment. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, which is really a weird record because it was like unfinished, so you have Derrick like on these things and we couldn't even go there. Like, honestly, like there was a time where me and Joey like went in the studio and like turned up, fired up, and like you hear like the talkback mics from the tracks, and how like if you ever made a record, you like, you're like, all right, dude, play that one again, and then you hear like Derrick's voice just all, okay, dude, so you want me to do that fill again right there? Okay, and then just all of his like quips. Like if you listen to the end of Acrophobe, you get an idea of the kind of guy Derrick was. Just constantly just witty little quips and like just sort of like ribbing everybody in the room, like whatever, fuckface. Okay, I'll do it again. Just he was that guy that could like lighten the mood because he just like would just say that kind of shit. Anyway, hearing that stuff was just like too eerie. It was because like it was too It was too fresh from when he died. It was like, it was so tragic how he died. And and basically he died in slow motion. Anyone who was in his life, like, watched this guy, like this, like I said, from when we were kids, he was like the guy who could do everything. He could skate better than everybody else. He could fucking build a house. He was like this prodigy person, and such a sweetheart of a dude, like such a fun guy. Like he was, he wasn't like this dark, morbid, sort of somber guy. He was like this fucking hilarious, snappy dude who was super intelligent and just so like in love with life and learning. He just wanted to know about everything, and loved music so much. But anyway, so it was really sad to watch this guy kind of die in slow motion for years and years and years, with struggling with a drug addiction and depression and all this stuff. And then eventually, unfortunately, he just couldn't pull it. But so it was really weird to try to make that record, because we thought like, God, it just felt weird. It felt like we were like
forcing it or something, or like
even worse than that, man. It honestly, it sounds melodramatic, but it sort of felt like we were like fucking robbing a grave or something. It just felt so weird. Like it felt like weird. It was like, I don't know, is it? And then eventually, I can't remember. There was maybe me and Joey were maybe talking on the phone or something, and it was just like, dude, in a weird way, like we almost like have to finish this record, not just for our own sake and closure, but also for Derrick. Like this is kind of his like, like he'd be kind of bummed if we just were like too scared to make this record, because we don't deal with the discomfort of like listening to his voice and hearing his drums, and also like there's a part of you that's like, I feel a little bit like, there's parts of like we had some other drummer come in and play a little bit of stuff, because there was some stuff that was unfinished. So Joey, that record's really like speaks to Joey's abilities as a producer. He was able to like really like kind of grab pieces of Derrick's drums and add them to other things, and it's really like a patchwork quilt of music. The song, I think one of the songs on the record, a lot of the lyrics weren't finished yet, so we were able to like go get Derrick's journals from like his girlfriend or whatever, and like use some of his little like journaling entries as song concepts. And I think we even used one of his lyrics for a song. Was there a song called like Auto Repair or something like that? I can't remember even what we ended up calling it.
Yeah, it's auto. It's not Auto Repair. It's called.
No, it's called.
Oh my God!
I should fucking know the name of the song on records I've been
Auto
on.
Care. Auto Care.
Auto Care. Duh. That's what.
Yeah.
It's one of those. Yeah, you end up calling it like 5 different things, and you don't remember what you actually put it on the record. But anyway, yeah, that was like his lyrics, and just like a lot of things like that. So it was a trip to make that record. But yeah, so Bad Astronaut was just kind of like, after we finished that, we were like, okay, well we can close the book on Bad Astronaut, because we can't do Bad Astronaut without Derrick Plourde, and why would we? And because that was the whole point, was for us to all do this together. And we're not like a band anyway. We're not like playing shows, so what? And then eventually we were like, why aren't we playing shows again? Like, it was just one of those things. We were like, who said we're not playing shows? Well, we said that. Okay, well, if we're the ones who made that rule, then we can fucking break it,
yeah.
Because like, what, no one even, why are we being so self-important? Like, what are we trying to prove? Joey wasn't doing that much shit with Lagwagon. I had a little bit of time off from Sugarcult, and we were just like, why not? Let's just do this, and let's go like take these songs out for a spin and play them live, just because we've never really tried. And we went and did it, and we had a lot of fun. And then we did it again in Canada, and we had a lot of fun. And then we got this crazy opportunity to go to Australia for this weird like festival tour with Black Flag of all of all bands, which we just did it. It was just like this will be an adventure, and why not, And I mean, the reason we don't do more shit is because it's just really like Joey's so busy with all the stuff he does with his solo stuff and Lagwagon, and Gimme Gimme's up until recently. So it's like, I don't know. Again, who knows? I never. It's not a matter of. It's not a matter of if. It's a matter of when.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll do it again some point. While we're all still kicking. So why not?
I noticed on your bio it lists Bad Astronaut and Playing Favorites as ongoing projects. So
yeah,
that gives me some hope as a listener.
I mean, that's how it's, dude. Isn't that the deal? Like, isn't life just a fucking ongoing project? Yeah. I mean, we all want to believe that there's these little like mile markers and structural things, but it's like, dude, who fucking knows? You know what I mean? Like, maybe we'll start maybe you and I'll start a band. Like, who knows what we're gonna do? You know, we want to believe that this is what it is, but I think part of being artistic is allowing yourself to sort of like, I don't know, allowing yourself the permission to, you know, to color outside the self-made guidelines that you make too. You know, I love Picasso, the old artist Picasso. He said, "Learn the rules like a pro, so you can break them like an artist." And I think that's important to remember that kind of shit. Like to, you know, okay, so there's some structures. There's the basic way people do shit. Okay, that's cool. Now what? You know, now how can we do it a little bit differently? And I think Bad Astronauts, like having that in my life was such a good counter to Sugarcult, which was much more like the mandate with Sugarcult when we started out was like we definitely don't want to be a punk band because we've all played in punk bands before and that's not exciting anymore. I've already done that. Like, it's fun. I love punk rock, but like I want to do something like I was getting really into like digging through used record stores and finding like power pop records, you know, like I've always loved like Cheap Trick, and I've always loved Elvis Costello and stuff like that, like the early records from Elvis Costello and Nick Lowe and all that shit. It was like, God, this is such a cool style of music that I feel like, other than like What I Like About You by the Romantics and maybe My Sharona by the Knack and obviously Cheap Trick, like I don't think anyone ever really, I don't think this vibe ever really like reached its potential. So it was like, how do you celebrate this kind of cool vibe, but at the same time not like be like a fucking cringy Civil War reenactor, you know, like when you see those bands that are like so fucking note perfect, like retro, where like their guitars are retro, their outfits are retro, their sound is retro, their subject matter is retro, and you're like, dude, you exist in the fucking 21st century. Stop trying to pretend like it's still 1972. You know, although shit from 1972 is cool as fuck and it's great, like again, use your influences, don't be your influences. Right? Otherwise it does become this like embarrassing like Civil War reenactment fucking Renaissance fair kind of shit. Right? And like, so we were thinking like that with Sugarcult. We were like, we love like the Foo Fighters and Nirvana and all the shit. There was a lot of good shit in the 90s that was like rock music coming from people that grew up on punk. And we're like, what if we could like do a band that was that kind of a vibe, but also like with, you know, stealing liberally from like the Cars and fucking, you know, Elvis Costello and Cheap Music. And so basically that was what we were going for. And like, you know, whenever you start out to go for something, you usually miss it and fail miserably. And so that's his life, you know, it's like you flunk upwards. And so we were going for that, and then we were like, well, this is kind of boring. The songs are too slow. Let's make them faster. And then it was like, well, your guitar sounds too jangly. Let's make it more crunchy. Okay, they're only giving us a 20-minute set. We want to play as many songs as possible, so let's make them shorter and make them faster. And so we sort of, by default, kind of like, well, when I used to be in this punk band, we used to do this. And so we I guess like we kind of reinvented the wheel and arrived at what people call pop punk. You know, it was like, oh shit. I guess we're fucking poppy. We write pop songs, but we play them with punk energy. So I guess they call it pop. One of the records we loved in Sugarcult when we first like early on was Jimmy Eat World, Bleed American. I always thought that was such a great, like, to me that band did exactly what we were setting out to try to do. I was like, this is what I mean. You know, when I heard that record, I was like, this is what we meant. And so that was like that record was a big one. But another record I always loved was Refused, Shape of Punk to Come. And that record to me had that spirit of like, there was two things about Refused, Shape of Punk to Come that I thought were like, for as far as Bad Astronaut goes, I feel like it was kind of coming from a similar place of being like, okay, we have punk and hardcore like up and metal upbringing, but we're not going to limit ourselves to that. We're not going to deny that like electronic music exists and jazz exists and all this other cool shit exists, and try to like liberate from the typical expectations of what someone is supposed to sound like in the scene. And so, I mean, I'm not saying Bad Astronaut is anywhere near as fucking important as Refused, but like, that record was cool. And then for as far as Bad Astronaut on a musical sort of thought process, as far as Sugarcult, I always thought their style was really cool. I was like, it's such a shame that in order to be credible and authentic, you need to look like you don't fucking care about what you're wearing.
Yeah.
And then I saw the way they looked, and they were like dyed black hair with like Beatles haircuts and fucking suits, you know.
That Swedish thing that was
something kind of European and cool about it. Yeah. And I've just always, that's where I maybe differ a lot from a lot of the people I grew up with in Santa Barbara. I've always thought like having style is really cool, and like it's not like a bad thing if you don't look like you just fucking woke up and jumped on stage. Like I don't think since I was like fucking 20 years old, I don't think I ever played a show in a pair of shorts. Because to me, it's like I love the like I just don't. Playing a show is not supposed to be comfortable. It's supposed to be fucking a presentation, you know.
Yeah, cool. And for someone watching.
And not to say anybody else should like think like me, but that's just my personal thing. I always thought like I like when bands look cool, and so that was with Sugarcult. We were just like, we want to look cool as fuck. We want to play music that's got like the spirit of like cool shit from the late 70s and early 80s, but is not limited to that. Not as though Nirvana never happened. Not as though the fucking Jimmy Eat World and the Foo Fighters aren't bands that we can, you know. So we were like, let's. That was sort of the blueprint. Not that you asked, but that was kind of like just to sort of break it down retrospectively. I'm like, it's kind of what we were going for, and I feel like we achieved it to some degree, and then allowed it to sort of like become its own thing, which I think most bands do. Eventually, you start out trying to kind of keep your hands on the wheel and, you know, control it, and then eventually you just kind of